You have no right to be here! Get your equipment off my land right now!
When I found 98 brand new houses worth $34 million sitting on land I'd owned for 30 years, that HOA Karen thought she'd pulled off the perfect heist. She looked at me with that smug, country club smile and thought I was just some senile old dirt farmer she could bulldoze over. Too bad she just handed me the deed to her entire subdivision. Picture coming home to discover an entire neighborhood where your cattle used to graze, families unpacking U-Hauls, kids chalking driveways, sprinklers hissing, all on your property without a single signature of permission. Victoria Ashworth had the audacity to serve me with a restraining order, claiming I was threatening families with surveying equipment. This woman stole my land, then painted me as a dangerous neighbor terrorizing innocent children. What she didn't know, my grandfather's 1924 contract means every house she built automatically became mine the moment they poured the first foundation. Soon she'd learn why you never steal from a land surveyor who's been documenting property theft for 40 years, especially when federal law is on your side. My name is Ezekiel Thornfield. Friends call me Zeke, and I'm what you might call old school Tennessee stubborn. At 67, I've spent 40 years as a land surveyor, walking property lines through briar patches and swamps, settling boundary disputes across 3 counties. My grandfather left me 847 acres of prime rolling hills back in '94, along with a piece of advice that stuck to my ribs like grits. Boy, never trust a man who measures land without getting his boots muddy. The morning mist here in Millbrook County usually carries a sweet scent of honeysuckle mixed with just a hint of diesel exhaust from the distant interstate. That used to be the smell of home. Every dawn, I'd walk my fence lines with a thermos of black coffee, listening to the gravel crunch under my work boots, checking for storm damage or loose wire. The metallic taste of well water and the earthy smell of cattle reminded me this was real farming, not the suburban fantasy that was slowly eating up Tennessee like a slow-moving cancer. My late wife, Martha, used to say I kept property records like other men collect baseball cards, obsessively and with pride that bordered on insanity. When she passed 5 years ago, the silence in the house became deafening. Our 2 kids moved off to chase city dreams in Portland and Atlanta, leaving me rattling around a 1952 farmhouse with just my heritage Angus cattle and memories. The trouble didn't start with a bang. It started with a vacation. I had returned from a 3-week visit to Oregon, helping my daughter Sarah through a messy divorce. I've been looking forward to getting back to my quiet routine. Coffee at sunrise, the lowing of cattle, maybe fixing a few rot-prone fence posts if I felt ambitious. You know, the kind of retirement that doesn't involve conference calls or HOA drama. But driving up my gravel driveway, the air felt different, heavier. Instead of the natural silence of the pasture or the song of meadowlarks, I heard a sound that made my skin crawl, the suburban symphony. Lawnmowers humming in unison, the rhythmic thwack of nail guns and the shrieking of children. These were sounds that had no business being on my back 40 acres. I grabbed my vintage surveying equipment, my trusty tripod and optical level, and headed toward the noise, figuring maybe some kids were trespassing or a lost tourist had broken down near the creek. Walking through my pasture, the sensory details shifted violently. The smell of wildflowers and creek water was replaced by the acrid stench of fresh asphalt, curing concrete and pressure-treated lumber. I crested a hill near the old oak tree, and what I found made my coffee mug slip from my hands and shatter against a limestone rock. It was an infection. 98 pristine, cookie-cutter houses were spread across my land. Manicured lawns, violently green and chemical-laden, replaced where my Angus cattle used to graze. A decorative stone entrance, reading Heritage Meadows Estates in a script fancier than a royal wedding invitation, stood mocking me. I saw families unpacking U-Hauls, golden retrievers chasing tennis balls, and fathers struggling with barbecue grills. The whole American dream package had been dropped right on top of my grandfather's legacy. I stood there gawking like a tourist in my own backyard. I looked for landmarks. There was my grandfather's oak tree, with Martha's initials still carved in the bark, now sitting awkwardly in someone's backyard next to a plastic swing set. There was Willow Creek, where I'd learned to fish, now channeled into a concrete culvert. This was definitely my land, but somebody had turned it into suburbia without bothering to ask permission. That's when I saw her, Victoria Ashworth. Call me Vicky. She materialized in a customized golf cart, wearing an official HOA badge on a lanyard, rolling toward me like she was patrolling the DMZ. She had that specific look. blonde highlights fresh in the salon, a polo shirt tucked into khaki shorts, and the dead-eyed smile of someone who has a local code enforcement officer on speed dial. "Excuse me, sir," she announced in that syrupy, condescending tone that immediately made my jaw clench. "This is private property. Heritage Meadows is a gated community for residents and invited guests only." I looked around at my trees, my creek, the land where my grandfather taught me that soil is the only thing that lasts, and realized I was about to get a masterclass in small-town corruption. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rage boiling in my gut, "I think there's been some kind of mistake. This is my property. Has been since 1994. Vicky's laugh sounded like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Oh, honey, I'm afraid you're confused." She didn't even blink. She pulled a thick folder out of the golf cart's glove box, flipping through pages with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in her entire life. The Heritage Meadows development was purchased legally from Millbrook Development Corporation 2 years ago. See? Right here. 847 acres purchased for fair market value. I'm sure this is just a surveying error on your part. The condescension in her voice made my blood pressure spike. She was treating me like a confused geriatric patient who had wandered off the ward. But 40 years of dealing with property disputes taught me one thing. When someone is trying to rob you blind, they act the most confident. "Mind if I see those documents?" I asked, reaching out. She snatched the folder back, clutching it like it contained nuclear launch codes. "I'm not legally required to share private HOA business with trespassers," she sniffed. "But I'll tell you what, I'm feeling generous today. These families have children starting school in 2 weeks. Surely we can work out some arrangement that doesn't disrupt their lives. Maybe you should go home and check your medication." That was the moment, that specific comment about medication. That's when I knew this was a mistake. This was a con job wrapped in suburban righteousness, and she had picked the wrong land surveyor to mess with. I thought the hardest part would be proving I own the land. I was wrong. The hardest part was watching my own community turn against me because a woman with a printer and a Facebook account decided I was a villain. Within 48 hours of meeting Victoria Ashworth, I wasn't just a victim of property theft. I was public enemy number 1.3 days after my encounter with a golf cart tyrant. There was a pounding on my front door that rattled the stained glass windows. It wasn't a neighborly knock. It was a police knock, authoritative, impatient, and heavy. I opened the door to find Deputy Mike Ashworth standing there. The last name wasn't a coincidence. Mike was Victoria's nephew, a man whose uniform always looked a size too tight, and whose arrogance was inversely proportional to his actual knowledge of the law. He held a sheaf of papers and wore a smirk that told me everything I needed to know about my chances of getting fair treatment in Millbrook County. "Ezekiel Thornfield," he said, not asking but stating, "I'm serving you with a temporary restraining order." I took the papers, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer absurdity of it. The order claimed I had trespassed on Heritage Meadows property and threatened residents with surveying equipment in a menacing manner. Apparently, in the eyes of the Ashworth clan, a 67-year-old man carrying a measuring tape and a tripod qualified as brandishing a weapon. The order prohibited me from coming within 100 feet of the residential zone, which, according to their map, cut off access to my own back 40 acres. "This is a joke, Mike," I said, looking him in the eye. "You know where my property line is. You used to hunt deer in those woods before you got a badge." Mike stepped closer, invading my personal space. "The judge signed it, Zeke. You step 1 foot over that line, and you go to jail. And let me tell you, at your age, the county lockup isn't a comfortable place to spend a weekend." Vicky wasn't done flexing her suburban warfare muscles. She knew that in a small town, legal battles are slow, but the court of public opinion moves at the speed of light. Within a week, every Heritage Meadows resident received a letter on official HOA letterhead. It warned of an unstable former landowner who posed a potential safety risk to families and children. She organized a neighborhood safety committee that patrolled my property line with the dedication of border guards. I'd be out feeding my chickens, and I'd see them, grown men in polo shirts and tactical sunglasses, standing on my land, filming me with their smartphones like I was running a meth lab instead of a farm. Then came the digital assault. Vicky was a maestro of social media manipulation. She posted side-by-side photos on the Sweetwater Springs Community Facebook group. On the left, a heavily filtered golden hour photo of the Heritage Meadows entrance, looking like paradise. On the right, a grainy, zoomed-in photo of my weathered farmhouse and an old tractor I hadn't gotten around to fixing, captioned, "Eyesores lowering our property values." The caption read, It breaks my heart that our beautiful new community is being threatened by a bitter neighbor who refuses to maintain his property. We just want a safe place for our kids to play. Hashtag Save Heritage Meadows. Hashtag Safety First. I made the mistake of reading the comments. It was like stepping into a nest of vipers. That old place is a dump, probably full of rats, wrote one user. I heard he yelled at a kid for riding a bike. Scum, wrote another. Even people I had known for years, people whose parents I'd gone to school with, were clicking like and adding sad face emojis. Vicky had successfully painted a picture where she was a guardian of civilization, and I was a barbarian at the gate. But here's where 40 years of surveying experience pays dividends. While Vicky was busy playing the victim online, I drove to the county courthouse. I didn't go to argue with the clerk. I went to the archives. I pulled the records for the supposed sale of my land. The transfer deed was there, shiny and seemingly official. But as I scanned it, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The filing fee for the supposed multi-million-dollar property transfer caught my eye immediately. $50 measly. Back in my early days of surveying, I learned that Tennessee requires big property transfers to have notarized affidavits with multiple witnesses and filing fees that match the transaction size. This smelled fishier than week-old catfish left in the sun. The real smoking gun, however, was a notary stamp. The name on the stamp was Eleanor Hutchins. I smiled for the first time in a week. Eleanor had been a fixture in this town, a sweet old lady who handled real estate closings for 3 decades and made the best peach cobbler in the county. The problem? Eleanor Hutchins had died of a stroke 6 months before she allegedly notarized my property transfer. Unless Eleanor was signing documents from the great beyond, somebody had forged her stamp. I called my old surveyor buddy, Clarence Bulldog McKenzie. Bulldog is a man who looks like a grizzly bear learned to use a GPS, and he forgot more about property law than most lawyers ever learn. Bulldog, I said into the phone, watching a Sentinel Security drone hover near my barn. I need you to bring the big guns, the total station, the historical maps, everything. Trouble, Zeke? His gravelly voice came through. Big trouble, I replied. Someone built a subdivision on my land, and they think a forged signature is going to stop me. Bulldog spent 2 days with his high-precision GPS equipment walking every inch of my boundaries, spitting tobacco juice and muttering profanities about amateur hour fraud attempts. When he came back to the porch, he looked grim but satisfied. Zeke, he said, wiping sweat from his forehead, your property lines are accurate within 6 inches. That whole subdivision is sitting on your land like fleas on a hound dog. But they've done more than just build houses. They've moved the boundary stakes. That's a felony. While I was building my case, Vicky escalated the psychological warfare. The Sentinel Security Services she hired started flashing spotlights into my bedroom windows at 2 a.m. Then came the state licensing board complaint, claiming I was mentally declining and dangerous to public safety, urging them to revoke my surveying license. Her evidence? My insistence on accessing my own property. The county piled on by threatening to condemn my farmhouse as a public nuisance. Apparently, 70 years of honest were made my home an eyesore compared to the plastic McMansions squatting on my pasture. That evening, checking my fence line in the dying light, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Hidden in the branches of my oak trees were security cameras. Not trail cams for deer. These were high-end surveillance units with cables snaking back toward Heritage Meadows. The acrid smell of electrical connections and fresh-cut plastic told the story. They'd been tapping into my power meter to run surveillance equipment to watch me. I sat in Martha's garden as crickets chirped, feeling the weight of the forces arrayed against me. The police, the HOA, the town council, the neighbors. I wondered if I should just take whatever money Vicky offered and retire somewhere warm. Maybe Arizona. Then I remember my grandfather's words after the railroad company tried to steal our mineral rights back in '89. Son, when someone tries to steal your land, they're not just taking dirt. They're stealing your family's history. Martha had agreed, writing in her journal that night. Zeke never backs down from protecting what's right. I stood up, dusting the soil off my knees. Time to honor that legacy. Vicky wanted a war? She was about to find out that she wasn't fighting a lonely old man. She was fighting the land itself, and I was just its voice. They say the camera adds 10 pounds, but in my case, it added a whole new personality. According to the Channel 7 Evening News, I wasn't Ezekiel Thornfield, respected land surveyor and widower. I was a Millbrook madman, a deranged hermit terrorizing young mothers. Vicky Ashworth didn't just want my land. She wanted to destroy my name so thoroughly that even my own shadow wouldn't want to be seen with me. But she made one critical mistake. She attracted the attention of the only person in the county who hated bullies more than I did. 2 weeks after restraining order, Vicky pulled her ace card. I was drinking my morning coffee, watching the sun burn the mist off the creek, when a caravan of vehicles rolled up to the entrance of Heritage Meadows. It wasn't construction trucks this time. It was a white van with a satellite dish mounted on top and the Channel 7 News logo plastered on the side. They set up like they were covering a presidential assassination or a hostage crisis. I watched through my binoculars as they positioned the cameras to frame the Heritage Meadows sign perfectly, with the manicured lawns in the background. Then, they turned the cameras toward my property. They didn't film the beautiful old oak trees or the historic farmhouse. No, they zoomed in on my compost pile and a stack of fence posts I was curing, angles chosen deliberately to make my working farm look like a derelict junkyard. The reporter was a man named Lance Sterling, a guy with teeth so white they looked fake and hair that wouldn't move in a hurricane. He interviewed concerned mothers clutching designer babies, nodding sympathetically as they recited the scripts Vicky had undoubtedly written for them. Then came Vicky's performance. It was Oscar-worthy. She stood in front of the camera, dabbing her eyes with a tissue that looked suspiciously dry. I turned on my old television set just in time to catch the live segment. We just want to live peacefully. Vicky sobbed on screen, her voice breaking perfectly on cue. We bought these homes to raise our families in safety. But Mr. Thornfield, he's confused. He yells at the children. He waves dangerous tools around. It breaks my heart to see someone in such obvious mental decline, but we can't let one person's delusions endanger our community. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Suburban Terror. Elderly neighbor threatens new development." I sat there, the coffee turned to acid in my stomach. The segment made me look like the villain in a Lifetime movie. They didn't interview me. They didn't check the property records. They just took the word of the councilman's wife and ran with it. But while Vicky was busy winning Emmy Awards for fake crying, I was doing what surveyors do best, following the paper trails and connecting the dots. The next morning, the fallout hit. I went to the mailbox, dodging the glare of a Sentinel security guard, and found a letter from Mutual Trust Insurance. My hands shook as I tore it open. Notice of cancellation. Reason: significant change in land usage, failure to disclose commercial development, hazardous conditions. My property insurance, which I had held with the same company for 40 years, was gone. Just like that. The letter claimed that aerial photos showing residential development, the houses they built illegally, voided my farm policy. Now, here's something interesting I learned helping my neighbor Jim catch insurance fraud back in '03. Insurance agents often use inside access to trigger cancellations, leaving victims vulnerable right before something unfortunate happens, like a mysterious fire. I did a quick search on my phone. Victoria Ashworth's LinkedIn profile popped up. Senior Risk Assessor, Mutual Trust Insurance. She worked there. She had used her employee access to look up my policy and sabotage my coverage, timing it perfectly with her legal assault. She was stripping me of my defenses one by one. If my house burned down tomorrow, I'd be destitute. And knowing the Ashworths, a fire wasn't out of the question. I felt a wave of despair, so heavy it nearly crushed me. I was fighting a war on 3 fronts, legal, social, and financial, against people who own the judges, the police, and the insurance companies. That afternoon, I was sitting on my porch, sharpening my bush axe, mostly to have something to do with my hands, so I wouldn't punch a wall, when a beat-up 2010 Subaru rattled up my driveway. It sounded like it needed a new muffler and maybe a priest. A woman stepped out. She was the polar opposite of Vicky. Messy dark hair tied back with a pencil, worn-out jeans, combat boots, and a leather jacket that had seen better decades. She lit a cigarette before she even shut the car door, looking around my property with sharp, calculating eyes. "You must be the Millbrook madman," she called out, smoke curling from her lips. I expected more foaming at the mouth, maybe a pitchfork. I didn't stand up. "If you were Channel 7, get off my land before I call the sheriff, though he probably sent you." She laughed, a dry, raspy sound. "Channel 7? Please. I have standards. I'm Ruby Morgan, Nashville Tribune, investigative desk." She walked up the steps, ignoring my glare, and tossed a newspaper onto the table next to me. "I watched that hatchet job on the news yesterday. Lance Sterling is a moron, but he's usually a harmless moron. That story, though, it smelled." "Smelled like what?" I asked, my curiosity piqued despite myself. "Like a coordinated hit. Ruby said, sitting down on the swing without asking. I've covered enough white-collar crime to recognize a con job when I see one. A crazy old man yelling at clouds isn't news. But a politically connected HOA president using a TV station to bully a senior citizen? That's a story. She pulled a notebook from her jacket pocket. Also, I did a little digging before I drove out here. Did you know that the Millbrook Development Corporation, the entity that sold the land to the HOA, didn't exist 3 years ago? It was incorporated exactly 2 days before the sale. I looked at her. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was drowning. 2 days? Shell company. Ruby nodded. And the registered agent is a lawyer in Memphis who was disbarred in 2015 from mortgage fraud. Mr. Thornfield, I think you're sitting on something much bigger than a boundary dispute. Mind if I see your documentation? For the next 3 days, my farmhouse turned into a war room. Ruby drank coffee strong enough to strip paint and worked with ferocity that scared me a little. She wasn't just a reporter, she was a bloodhound. While I explained the surveying inconsistencies, Ruby focused on the digital footprint. Internet archives never lie, Zeke, she muttered, typing furiously on her laptop. They think hitting delete makes things disappear. It just makes them harder to find. She pulled up the Wayback Machine, an archive of the internet. She found the original marketing website for Heritage Meadows. Look at this, she pointed to the screen. These site plans were uploaded in 2021, but the deed they showed you, the one allegedly signed by Eleanor Hutchins, was dated 2022. They were selling lots and taking deposits a full year before they even pretended to buy the land. Premeditation, I whispered. Exactly, Ruby grinned, showing teeth that weren't perfect, but looked a hell of a lot more honest than Lance Sterling's. And I found something else. Your councilman, Brad Ashworth? I pulled his sealed juvenile record from Kentucky. It took some calling in favors, but I got it. What's in it? Real estate fraud, Ruby said. He was running scams with his dad when he was 17, faking rental agreements on foreclosed homes. He's got experience stealing property. He just never attempted grand theft on this scale before. We were building a picture of a criminal enterprise that was breathtaking in its arrogance. But as we dug deeper, the pressure from the outside world intensified. My phone rang. It was a county clerk's office. Mr. Thornfield, a bored voice said, we're initiating eminent domain proceedings on behalf of the county. Heritage Meadows has been deemed essential housing for community growth. We're offering you the agricultural appraisal value of $80,000 for your 847 acres. $80,000. The land was worth $12 million as residential property. It was classic government theft. Steal property for pennies, handed to developer cronies for millions. They're moving fast, Ruby said, her eyes narrowing as I told her the news. They know we're digging. They're trying to bury you before we can find the body. Then, the physical attacks began. My cattle started getting sick. I found 3 of my prize Angus heaving in the pasture, foaming at the mouth. The vet traced it to poisoning. Antifreeze dumped in the water troughs near the fence line. They're not just coming for the land anymore, Zeke, Ruby said, watching me comfort a dying calf. Her voice was quiet, stripped of its usual cynicism. They're trying to break you. I stood up, wiping dirt and tears from my face. I looked at the pristine houses of Heritage Meadows, glowing in the sunset, built on a foundation of lies and now animal cruelty. They want a crazy old man, I said, gripping the handle of my shovel until my knuckles turned white. I think it's time I introduced them to Zeke Thornfield. I always believed that in America, the law was a shield for the innocent. I found out the hard way that in a small town run by a corrupt clique, the law isn't a shield, it's a club, and they were beating me to death with it. They say justice is blind, but in Millbrook County, justice was peeking out from under the blindfold to check the defendant's bank account and political connections. The legal system revealed its true face on a rainy Tuesday morning. Judge Harold Pemberton scheduled an emergency hearing regarding the restraining order and the county's condemnation threats. I walked into the courtroom wearing my Sunday best, a suit I hadn't worn since Martha's funeral, feeling a flicker of hope. I had the truth. I had the deeds, even if they were being contested. And I had 40 years of clean living in this community. That hope died the moment I saw Judge Pemberton wink at Brad Ashworth. I knew Harold Pemberton. He golfed with Brad every Thursday at the country club. They owned stock together in 3 local development shell companies. In any ethical jurisdiction, Pemberton would have recused himself faster than a scalded cat. But here, conflict of interest wasn't in his vocabulary. My court-appointed attorney, a sweaty man named Mr. Simmons, showed up 5 minutes late, smelling like peppermint trying to cover up cheap bourbon. He hadn't even opened my file. He mispronounced my name twice, calling me Mr. Thornton, before leaning over and whispering, "Look, Zeke, these people have deep pockets. My advice? Take the plea. Admit to the menacing behavior. Agree to the property easement, and maybe we can keep you out of jail." I'm not admitting to a lie. I hissed back. I want a jury trial. When I demanded a jury trial, Judge Pemberton looked at me over his spectacles like I was a bug he wanted to squash. "Mr. Thornfield," he droned. "Due to the backlog of cases and the public safety nature of this dispute, I am postponing the trial phase indefinitely. However, the temporary restraining order remains in effect. You are barred from interfering with Heritage Meadows operations." They were bleeding me out. They knew I didn't have the time or money to wait them out. They were hoping I'd die of old age before a jury ever heard my side. Meanwhile, Vicky convinced the Heritage Meadows families that their property values would crater if the crazy old man won. She launched a defense fund on a crowdfunding site. "Help us protect our homes from a hostile neighbor," the page screamed. She collected $50,000 in legal donations from terrified families within 48 hours. Funny how that money didn't go to lawyers. Ruby Morgan did a little digging and found that the Legal Defense Fund bank account had a debit card attached to it. 2 days after the fundraiser hit its goal, Brad and Vicky posted photos on Instagram from a stress relief trip to a vineyard in Tuscany. The caption read, "Finding peace amidst the chaos." They were drinking wine in Italy on their neighbor's dime, using funds raised to fight me. The residents were organizing car washes and bake sales, unknowingly funding their own exploitation with the enthusiasm of cult members. But while they were sipping Chianti, things on the farm took a dark turn. My water well, which had pumped sweet, cold limestone water since 1952, changed overnight. I went to fill the coffee pot, and the water came out frothy and brown. It smelled like chemical solvent. "Heritage Meadows," I muttered, looking at the tap. I hiked up the ridge, staying just outside the 100-foot restraining zone, to check the runoff. Sure enough, the subdivision storm drains were pointed directly at my aquifer recharge zone. They weren't using retention ponds like the code required. They were piping raw runoff, oil from driveways, fertilizers, pesticides, and construction debris, straight into the groundwater feeding my well in Willow Creek. I bottled a sample, my hands shaking with rage. They were poisoning me. The stress finally caught up with me 3 days later. I was out in the barn, trying to hand feed a calf whose mother had died from the antifreeze poisoning, when my chest felt like it was being squeezed by a giant iron fist. The world tilted sideways. The smell of hay and manure spun around me, and the last thing I heard was the lowing of the cattle before the darkness swallowed me whole. I woke up to the beep of monitors and the sterile smell of antiseptic. Millbrook General Hospital. Mild heart attack, the doctor said, looking at me with tired eyes. Stress-induced. "Mr. Thornfield, you need to eliminate conflict from your life. Your heart can't take this level of cortisol. Eliminate conflict." Easy for him to say. That evening, the room was quiet. Ruby had gone home to feed her cat, and I was lying there watching the shadows lengthen on the wall, feeling old and defeated. The door creaked open. I expected a nurse. It was Vicky. She wasn't wearing her HOA badge. She was dressed in soft pastels, carrying a bouquet of cheap grocery store flowers. She walked to the bedside, her heels clicking on the linoleum. She looked at the heart monitor, then at me, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. "Zeke," she whispered, "you look terrible." "Get out." I rasped, my voice weak. She placed the flowers on the tray table, leaning in close. The smell of her expensive perfume was suffocating. "I'm here to make you an offer. Zeke, a mercy offer." She pulled a folded check from her purse. $200,000. Plus, we'll pay your medical bills. I looked at the check. It was a lot of money. Enough to move away. Enough to rest. "All you have to do," she purred, leaning over the bed rails like a vulture, "is sign the quitclaim deed and admit that your claim was a result of confusion. Dementia. We can write the narrative together. You can leave with dignity." "Why?" I asked. "If you own the land, why pay me?" Her mask slipped. For a second, the bubbly HOA president vanished, and I saw the predator underneath. Her eyes went cold and hard. "Because you're annoying, Zeke. You're a stain on my perfect community. And honestly, we're going to win anyway. The judge is with us. The city is with us. The insurance company is with us. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. This could all disappear tomorrow. Think about your family. Think about your health. Is dirt really worth dying over? Lying there with heart monitors beeping, for needles pricking my arm, and this woman threatening my life in the guise of charity, something happened inside me. The fear evaporated. The stress vanished. It was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. It was the same feeling I got when I found a benchmark that everyone said was lost. She thought I was broken. She thought the hospital bed was a sign of defeat. She didn't realize she had just given me the motivation to burn her entire kingdom to the ground. "Vicky," I said, my voice steady for the first time in days. "You kept the receipt for those flowers, right?" She blinked, confused. "What?" "Because you're gonna need every penny for your legal defense. Get the hell out of my room." She snatched the check back, her face twisting into a sneer. "Have it your way. Oh man, die alone." She stormed out. As the door swung shut, I reached for phone on the bedside table. I wasn't calling a lawyer. I was calling Ruby. "Ruby," I said when she answered, "bring your laptop to the hospital and call that friend of yours at the EPA. I'm done playing defense. It's time to go to war." Getting out of that hospital bed felt like waking up from a nightmare into a mission. They had poisoned my water, killed my cattle, and tried to buy my soul. They wanted the land? Fine. I was going to make sure they choked on it. Getting out of that hospital bed felt like waking up from a nightmare and stepping directly into a war zone. While I'd been playing invalid, Vicky and Brad had been busy cementing their theft with political maneuvering slick enough to make a Vegas card shark jealous. But they made one fatal calculation error. They assumed that because I was old, I was done. They didn't realize in the world of land surveying, the oldest documents are often the deadliest. And I was about to dig up a ghost from 1924 that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Discharge papers in hand, I walked out of the hospital doors into the humid Tennessee air. I felt different. The chest pain was gone, replaced by a cold, metallic determination. I wasn't just a farmer protecting his land anymore. I was a man dismantling a criminal empire. Ruby Morgan picked me up at the curb. Her beat-up Subaru was now filled with empty energy drink cans and map printouts. She looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days. "You look like hell, Zeke," she greeted me, popping a piece of nicotine gum. "I feel like a new man," I replied, tossing my bag in the back. What did I miss while I was napping? "Everything," Ruby said, peeling out of the parking lot. "Brad introduced an emergency city council resolution this morning. They're voting to annex Heritage Meadows into the Sweetwater Springs city limits." It was a bureaucratic masterstroke. If the city annexed the land, it would override county property jurisdiction. It would place the subdivision squarely under municipal control, where Brad's influence ran deeper than a sinkhole. They had fast-tracked the vote for 10 days out, buried the notice in the legal classifieds, where only lawyers and insomniacs look. "They're trying to legalize the theft before we can prove it a crime," I said, watching the telephone poles blur by. "Exactly," Ruby nodded. "But we caught a break. A big one. I got a call from a guy named Danny Kowalski. We met Danny at a roadside diner 3 towns over, far away from the prying eyes of Sentinel Security. Danny was a mountain of a man, a former construction foreman with hands the size of catcher's mitts and eyes that darted nervously at the door every time it opened. He had worked on the Heritage Meadows project for 6 months before quitting. "I couldn't do it anymore, Mr. Thornfield," Danny said, staring into his coffee. "I've been in construction for 30 years. I've cut corners. But this was evil." Danny reached under the table and slid a heavy roll of blueprints toward me. "Look at the drainage plan." I unrolled the plans, pushing aside the salt and pepper shakers. My surveyors, I caught the issue immediately. These flow lines, they're dumping straight into the wetlands. "It's worse," Danny whispered. "See those 3 houses on the North Ridge? The one selling for $500,000? We built them on a wooden platform over a peat bog. Brad ordered us to skip the concrete pilings to save 2 weeks and 50 grand. He told us to just pour a slab over the mud and cover it up. They're floating on a swamp," I said, horrified. "They're death traps," Danny corrected. "One heavy rain season, and those foundations will crack like eggshells. And the wetlands, we didn't just drain them. Brad made us bury construction waste, asbestos, lead paint, chemical drums, right there in the marsh. Then we poured the tennis court over it. This wasn't just code violations. This was a federal environmental crime. It was a leverage we needed for the EPA, but I needed something that would kill their claim to the land entirely. I needed the nuclear option. Danny, I said, will you testify? If I do, I'll never work in the state again, he said, his voice trembling. But I got kids, and seeing those families move into houses I know are going to sink? Yeah, I'll testify. With the environmental ammunition secured, Ruby and I headed to the one place that held the secrets of the county, the courthouse basement. Not the digital records room upstairs where the clerks worked. I'm talking about the sub-basement, the archives. It was a dungeon of damp concrete and flickering fluorescent lights that smelled like mothballs, dust, and forgotten promises. This is where they kept the records that hadn't been digitized yet. The deep history of Millbrook County. What are we looking for, Zeke? Ruby asked, sneezing as she moved a stack of ledgers from the 1950s. My grandfather told me a story once. I said, walking toward the back wall where the oldest boxes were stacked. Back in the 1920s, the Tennessee Central Railroad wanted to run a spur line through our valley. They signed easement contracts with all the farmers. The line was never built, but the contracts were filed. So, it's an unused easement. Ruby shrugged. Grandpa Ezekiel was paranoid. I explained, running my flashlight over the dusty labels. He didn't trust the railroad to just walk away. He insisted on a reversion clause with specific penalties. If I can find that original contract. We spent 6 hours down there. My back ached, my eyes burned, and I was covered in 70 years of grime. Ruby was ready to give up. Zeke, this is a needle in a haystack, and the haystack is made of boring government paper. She groaned. Keep looking. Box 142. Railroad/utility 1920 to 1930 foot. And there it was, wedged between a foreclosure ledger and a stack of birth certificates. A manila envelope, brittle with age, tied with a frayed red string. The label read, Thornfield/TN Central RR, 1924. My hands trembled as I untied the string. I pulled out the document. It was typed on heavy bond paper. The ink faded to a sepia brown, but still legible. I scanned the dense legal jargon until I found it. Clause 7. I read aloud, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. In the event that the railway company or its successors fail to construct the designated line within 10 years, all easement rights revert to the landowner. Furthermore, any unauthorized structures, improvements, or fixtures erected upon said land by any entity other than the landowner shall, upon discovery of encroachment, immediately become the sole property of the landowner, without compensation or reimbursement. Sweet mother of pearl, Ruby whispered, leaning over my shoulder. Read that again. Any unauthorized structures shall immediately become the sole property of the landowner. I looked up at Ruby, a grin spreading across my face that hurt my cheeks. Do you know what this means? It means you don't just want them off your land. Ruby realized, her eyes widening. It means I own them. I finished. Federal Railway Commission filings supersede local zoning. This contract was filed federally. It's ironclad, because they built on the easement zone without checking the 1924 master file. Every single house, the clubhouse, the pool, and the gate, legally, they already belong to me. Zeke. Ruby laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. Vicky Ashworth didn't just steal your land. She just built you a $42 million retirement gift. The strategic advantage was overwhelming. I didn't need to fight them in a local court where the judge was bribed. I could take this straight to the federal level. The power fantasy wasn't a fantasy anymore. I was a landlord of Heritage Meadows, and they were all trespassing in my houses. But we couldn't just walk in and wave the paper. Brad would shred it, deny it, or burn the courthouse down if he knew it existed. We needed to spring the trap publicly. We needed an event where they couldn't run, couldn't hide, and couldn't spin the story. The festival, Ruby said, reading my mind. What? Vicky is throwing a Heritage Meadows Family Festival this Saturday. Ruby grinned, pulling up the flyer on her phone. She invited the mayor, the media, and the governor. She wants to show off her perfect community before the annexation vote. She invited the media? I asked, looking at the contract in my hands. Oh, yeah, live coverage. I carefully placed the document back in the envelope. Well then, I said, the metallic taste of victory already on my tongue. It would be rude of us not to attend. Call your friend at the EPA. Call the U.S. Marshals. We're going to a party. The stage was set. Vicky thought she was orchestrating a public relations victory to cement her theft. Instead, she was preparing her own public execution. The sweet smell of barbecue smoke and cotton candy would soon mix with the acrid stench of burning lies. Festival Day was coming, and I planned to give Heritage Meadows a celebration they would never, ever forget. There's a specific kind of silence that happens right before a tornado touches down. The birds stop singing, the air pressure drops until your ears pop, and the sky turns a bruised shade of purple. That was exactly what the 48 hours before the Heritage Meadows Family Festival felt like. While Vicky Ashworth was busy ordering thousands of dollars worth of balloons and hiring a clown to distract from her crimes, Ruby's kitchen table had transformed into the command center for the most elaborate sting operation in Millbrook County history. We weren't just planning a lawsuit. We were orchestrating a takedown that would make the feds look like they were running a Swiss watch. Ruby's small apartment smelled of stale coffee and high-stakes justice. The kitchen table had disappeared under an avalanche of legal documents, topographic maps, laptops, and enough caffeine to fuel a NASA launch. Martha would love this. Organized chaos with a righteous purpose. We weren't alone anymore. The team had assembled, and it was a lineup that would make any defense attorney break out in hives. Marcus Webb arrived first. He looked like federal justice personified, a silver-haired prosecutor in a tailored suit who had spent 40 years sending white-collar criminals to prison. His wire-rimmed glasses had witnessed more courtroom victories than I'd had hot dinners. He reviewed our evidence with surgical precision, treating the 1924 railroad contract like a holy relic. Your grandfather was a visionary, Zeke, Marcus said, spreading the yellow documents like poker cards. I've prosecuted 12 railway easement cases in my career. This language regarding the automatic reversion of improvements is so bulletproof it could stop a freight train. Legally speaking, Vicky Ashworth has been acting as your unpaid general contractor for 2 years. Then there was Dr. Sarah Lightfoot, who joined us via video call from Washington. She was the EPA's heavy hitter, the kind of person who eats corporate polluters for breakfast. When she saw Danny Kowalski's photos of the buried chemical drums and the concrete poured over the wetlands, her expression went cold. The wetlands damage assessment is catastrophic, Dr. Lightfoot explained, her voice carrying the weight of congressional testimony. $15 million to restore habitat that took centuries to develop. And the salamander species they destroyed? That's the Tennessee cave salamander. Federally protected. The fines for destroying their breeding ground compound daily. We're talking about generational bankruptcy for the developers. Danny Kowalski sat in the corner, looking like a man who had finally put down a heavy load. These houses are death traps on stilts, he told the group, pointing to the blueprints. Brad ordered pressure-treated lumber instead of proper concrete pilings to save money. Families are living in expensive houseboats that don't know they're sinking yet. The gallows humor wasn't lost on anyone. Heritage Meadows residents were literally living above their problems. Finally, there was Patty Goldman, a forensic accountant Ruby had flown in from Chicago. She connected financial dots with the enthusiasm of someone solving a Sunday crossword. Her laptop displayed money trails that looked like spaghetti art created by drunken toddlers. Total fraud exceeds $89 million, Patty announced, tapping a key that made a pie chart appear on the screen. They pre-sold 150 lots using fake ownership documents. But here's the kicker. The construction loans were secured using your property as collateral, Zeke. The bank executives who signed off on this without a proper title search, they're going to be facing federal conspiracy charges when this house of cards collapses. This isn't just theft, it's a Ponzi scheme. Ruby stood at the whiteboard, orchestrating the media strategy with military precision. She marked the timeline like D-Day invasion plans. 11 a.m., EPA inspection team infiltrates via the creek bed during opening ceremonies. 1 p.m., federal marshals position at the exits during the face painting hour. 2 p.m., Zeke takes the stage. 2:05 p.m., the story goes live on the Tribune's website. The coordination impressed even my surveyor's love of detailed planning. EPA handled environmental crimes. FBI covered financial fraud, and U.S. Marshals would enforce the 1924 contract with authority that local corruption couldn't touch. My biggest concern, however, remained the innocent families caught in Vicky's web. These people bought the American dream from professional liars. I insisted, tasting the metallic determination that meant no compromise on principles. We expose the criminals, but we don't destroy the casualties. Marcus nodded. We've researched victim compensation programs. And your plan for the rent-to-own agreements. It stands, I said. If the houses are safe, and Danny says about half of them can be salvaged, I'll offer fair contracts to the residents. They can pay me what they were paying the bank, but this time, they'll actually own a home at the end. The night before the festival, the atmosphere shifted. The strategy was set Now it was just waiting. I went back to the farm to grab my grandfather's old compass, a brass instrument he'd given me when I got my license. I wanted to wear it around my neck like a talisman. The Ashworths, sensing their annexation vote was close, decided to ramp up the intimidation one last time. When I arrived home, I found my phone line dead, cut the box outside. My truck tires had been slashed again, and nailed to my front door was a note, "Accidents happen to stubborn old fools." A week ago, this would have terrified me. Now, I laughed. It was amateur hour. It was a desperate thrashing of a trapped animal that didn't know the cage door was already shut. I left a note there. It would make excellent evidence for Marcus in the morning. I walked out to the family plot as the sun began to set, painting the Tennessee sky in soft purples and golds. I knelt beside Martha's headstone, clearing away a few fallen leaves. The scent of wild honeysuckle was thick in the air, reminding me why this land mattered beyond money or property rights. "You were right, Martha," I whispered to the cold stone. "You said I'd never back down from doing what's right. Well, tomorrow, we're going to make sure everyone knows it." I could almost hear her voice in the wind, telling me to make sure my tie was straight. I slept better that night than I had in years. Festival morning arrived with a kind of picture perfect, whether that made Vicky believe God himself endorsed her theft. The sky was a piercing blue, the humidity was low, and Heritage Meadow sparkled like a movie set. I watched from my upstairs window as the circus arrived. Bouncy houses were inflated. A stage was erected near the wetlands. Ironic. Caterers set up tables draped in white linen. I saw Vicky running around with a clipboard, barking orders at terrified teenagers, checking every detail to ensure her coordination was perfect. She had planned a festival to celebrate her victory. Instead, she was about to host the most expensive public confession in Tennessee history. At 10 a.m., Ruby's car rolled up the gravel drive, followed by two black SUVs that didn't look like they belonged in a farm country driveway. The men inside wore tactical vests under windbreakers. "Ready, Zeke?" Ruby asked, leaning out the window. She was wearing a press badge and a grin that could cut glass. I stepped off my porch, wearing my grandfather's compass and my best Sunday suit. I looked at the festival grounds one last time, hearing the faint sound of the PA system testing the microphone. "Let's go teach them a lesson about property lines," I said. The sweet smell of funnel cakes and the innocent laughter of children would soon mix with the taste of exposed corruption. The trap was set. The players were in position. And the Ashworths didn't have a clue that the ground beneath their feet was about to open up and swallow them whole. They say pride comes before a fall. But in the case of the Ashworths, it was a catered barbecue buffet that came before the fall. Festival day morning broke with the kind of oppressive humidity that makes Tennessee summers legendary and tempers shorter than a roadside firecracker. Heritage Meadows looked like Norman Rockwell's fever dream. Red, white, and blue bunting draped over stolen land. Children's laughter echoing across wetlands that had been murdered for suburban sprawl, and a cover band playing Don't Stop Believin' near the very spot where they buried toxic waste drums. It was the perfect stage for a tragedy, disguised as a neighborhood block party. Vicky Ashworth had pulled out every manipulation trick in the suburban playbook. As Ruby and I walked toward the entrance, flanked discreetly by undercover agents looking like tourists, I took a scale of her deception. She had invited the entire county. There were bouncy houses for the kids, a petting zoo, ironic, considering she poisoned my cattle, and a massive stage draped in banners reading Heritage Meadows. Building tomorrow, today. The air smelled of funnel cakes, charcoal smoke, and deception. I spotted Vicky near the gazebo. She was holding court like a queen bee, wearing a floral dress that probably cost more than my first tractor. She was laughing, touching arms, and pointing out the amenities to the mayor, who was nodding along, likely thinking about the tax revenue the annexation would bring. "Look at her," Ruby whispered, adjusting the hidden camera pinned to her jacket. "She thinks she's untouchable. She's about to find out that federal agents don't care about HOA bylaws," I replied, scanning the perimeter. Our plan relied on timing. We needed to let the festival hit its peak. We needed the news crews to be live. At noon, the ceremony began. Brad Ashworth took the stage, flashing his politician smile. He looked slick, confident, and utterly corrupt. "Welcome, friends and neighbors," Brad boomed into the microphone. "Today isn't just a barbecue. It's a celebration of community. Despite the challenges posed by certain confused individuals," he gestured vaguely toward my farmhouse in the distance, "we are moving forward with a city annexation to ensure your investments are protected." The crowd cheered. These poor people. They were cheering for the man who had leveraged their mortgages to launder money for Russian gangsters. Then came the stunt. Vicky joined him on stage, holding an oversized cardboard check. It was written out to Ezekiel Thornfield for the sum of $300,000. "We want to be good neighbors," Vicky announced, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "We know Mr. Thornfield is struggling. So, publicly, we are offering this settlement to help him find a facility where he can get the care he needs." A hush fell over the crowd. It was a masterstroke of cruelty disguised as charity. She was publicly declaring me senile and offering a generous buyout to make herself look like a saint. That was my cue. I stepped out from the crowd. The murmur started at the back and rolled forward like a wave. It's him, the crazy neighbor. I wasn't wearing my dirty work clothes. I was in my suit, standing tall, holding a leather satchel. I walked straight toward the stage. Sentinel security guards stepped forward to block me, hands on their pepper spray, but two large men in windbreakers, U.S. Marshals, intercepted them quietly. A flash of a badge, a whispered word, and the security guards turned pale and stepped aside. I climbed the stairs to the gazebo. Vicky's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly. "Zeke," she chirped into the mic, "I'm so glad you decided to join us. Are you here to accept our gift?" I didn't take the check. I walked to the podium, leaned into the microphone, and looked out at the sea of faces. My neighbors, the families living in houses built on lies. "I'm not here for your money, Vicky," I said, my voice steady and amplified across the subdivision. "And I'm not here to ruin a party. I'm here to introduce you to some new guests." At that exact moment, the trap sprung. Down by the creek, a commotion erupted. Dr. Sarah Lightfoot and her EPA team emerged from the tree lean. They weren't wearing party clothes. They were in full hazmat gear. It was a visual shock that stopped the band mid-song. "What is the meaning of this?" Brad shouted, trying to regain control. "Get those people out of here. This is private property." "Actually, it's a crime scene." Dr. Lightfoot's voice cut through the air. She held up a megaphone. "I am Dr. Sarah Lightfoot with the Environmental Protection Agency. We have just confirmed the presence of class of toxic waste buried under the tennis courts and significant wetland destruction. This entire area is now under federal jurisdiction." Panic rippled through the crowd. Parents grabbed their children. The perfect community. Illusion shattered instantly. But we weren't done. Brad turned to me, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "You planned this? You senile old bat. I'll have you buried in a lawsuit so deep you'll never see the sun." "I don't think you'll have time for lawsuits, Brad," I said calmly. "You have an interview." I pointed to the side of the stage. The Channel 7 News crew, who Brad had invited to film his triumph, was rolling live. But they weren't filming him. They were filming the 3 FBI agents walking up the stairs. Brad froze. The arrogant swagger evaporated, replaced by the primal fear of a man who knows the game is up. "Bradley Ashworth?" the lead agent asked, his badge glinting in the sunlight. I am Councilman Ashworth," Brad stammered, looking for an exit. "You can't do this here. I have immunity. I know the governor. You're under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering," the agent recited, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. The click of the metal cuffs was the loudest sound in Millbrook County. On live television, the respected councilman was spun around and handcuffed. The crowd gasped. Vicky screamed, a shrill, piercing sound that had nothing to do with fear for her husband and everything to do with fear for herself. "This is a mistake." Vicky shrieked, grabbing the microphone. "This is a conspiracy. That old man is lying. He bribed them. He's the criminal." She looked deranged. The step-forward wife mask had completely fallen off, revealing the terrified, vicious narcissist underneath. Ruby stepped forward from the press pool, holding up her phone, which was live streaming to the Tribune's website. "Mrs. Ashworth," she shouted, "what about the $2.3 million in bearer bonds found in your suitcase at the airport this morning? Were those for the community too?" Vicky went pale. She didn't know we knew about the go bag she had stashed. In the crowd, the residents were waking up. Maria Santos, the teacher who had bought the blue house on the corner, walked up to the edge of the stage. She looked at Brad in handcuffs, then at the hazmat team digging up the playground. "You told us it was safe," Maria yelled, her voice breaking. "My daughter's playing that dirt. You told us it was safe. It was a business decision." Brad yelled back as he was dragged down the stairs, revealing his true colors to the very end. The chaos was absolute. The bouncy house was deflating. The band had fled. The smell of barbecue was replaced by the cold reality of federal justice. But Vicky was still standing there. She hadn't been arrested yet. She looked at me, her eyes filled with pure hatred. "You think you've won?" she hissed, away from the mic. "You haven't won anything. The deed is still in the HOA's name. We have lawyers. We have insurance. You're just a trespassing old fool who ruined a barbecue." I smiled. I reached into my leather satchel. "You're right about one thing, Vicky," I said, pulling out the 1924 railroad contract. "I didn't win the lawsuit." I unfolded the yellowed paper. I didn't have to. There are moments in history where the world seems to stop spinning, where the noise of the crowd fades away, and all that remains is a cold, hard weight of the truth. This was one of those moments. Brad Ashworth was being shoved into the back of an FBI SUV, the flashing lights reflecting off the shiny siding of the clubhouse he'd built with stolen money. But Vicky stood alone on a gazebo stage, trembling not with fear, but with the blind, rabid denial of a narcissist who refuses to believe the movie is over. She thought she still held the high ground because she held the deed. She was about to learn that in the game of property law, a deed based on fraud is just expensive toilet paper, while a federal railway contract is a loaded gun. The festival grounds were a tableau of chaos. The music had stopped. The children were clinging to their parents. The air was thick with the dust of the EPA excavation and the static of police radios. Vicky Ashworth, stripped of her husband and her entourage, looked like a cornered rat, vicious, erratic, and dangerous. She gripped the podium so hard her knuckles turned white. "You think arresting Brad changes anything?" she screamed, her voice cracking under the strain. "The HOA is a separate legal entity. We own this land. We have title insurance. You can't touch these houses, Zeke. They're occupied dwellings. You're just a sad old man waving a piece of paper." I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt a strange calm. "You're right, Vicky. I can't touch the houses you own." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. "But you don't own them." I stepped closer to the microphone, my grandfather's surveyor compass heavy and cool against my chest. I held up the yellow document, the 1924 Tennessee Central Railroad Agreement. The wind caught the fragile paper, making it rustle, a dry, ancient sound that seemed louder than the sirens. "Ladies and gentlemen," I addressed the crowd, my voice projecting with the authority of 40 years of calling property lines. "What I hold in my hand is the original easement contract filed by my grandfather, Ezekiel Thornfield Sr., in 1924. It was filed with the Federal Railway Commission. It supersedes county records. It supersedes city annexation. It even supersedes your HOA bylaws." Vicky rolled her eyes, trying to rally the confused residents. "It's a dusty old train contract. It's irrelevant." "Is it?" I asked. I put on my reading glasses, slow and deliberate. "Let me read you Clause 7. I began to read, enunciating every syllable. "In the event that unauthorized structures are erected upon the designated easement zone, all such improvements, fixtures, and dwellings shall immediately, and without compensation, revert the ownership of the landowner." I looked up over my glasses. The silence in the crowd was absolute. "It continues," I said, driving the final nail into the coffin. "The landowner shall assume full title to all improvements as penalty for the encroachment. This transfer is automatic and requires no judicial decree." I folded the paper and looked at Vicky. "Do you understand what that means, Vicky? It means you didn't just steal my land. You acted as my unpaid general contractor." I gestured to the sprawling subdivision, the 98 houses, the Olympic-sized swimming pool, the tennis courts, the clubhouse with the marble floors. "The moment you poured the concrete for that clubhouse," I said, "it became mine. The moment you built that gate, it became mine. Every single house in Heritage Meadows. Under federal law, they belong to me, right now, today." The realization hit the crowd like a physical blow. The residents looked from their homes to me, the color draining from their faces. They weren't living in an HOA community anymore. They were living on Ezekiel Thornfield's private estate. Vicky's face went from pale to a blotchy, furious red. The sheer magnitude of the loss, $42 million in real estate transferred to her enemy by her own incompetence, snapped the last thread of her sanity. "No!" she shrieked, lunging at me. "That's a lie. That's a fake. Give me that." She tried to grab the document, her manicured claws raking the air, but she never reached me. Marcus Webb, the U.S. attorney, stepped between us. He didn't look like a lawyer anymore. He looked like a linebacker in a suit. He caught Vicky's wrist in midair. "Mrs. Ashworth," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. "Assaulting a federal witness in the middle of a sting operation? You really are going for the high score." Vicky struggled, spitting and kicking. "He's stealing my houses. Arrest him. He's the thief." "Actually," Marcus said, signaling to the waiting marshals, "we're seizing the assets. But not from Mr. Thornfield. We're seizing your illegal gains. You are under arrest for 47 counts of wire fraud, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit environmental terrorism." 2 female marshals moved in, spinning Vicky around. When the handcuffs clicked this time, it felt final. The queen of the HOA, the woman who had terrorized the county with threats of fines and liens, was now bound in stainless steel. As they dragged her toward the waiting transport van, Vicky unleashed the darkness that had always been hiding behind her suburban smile. "These people don't deserve nice homes anyway," she screamed, thrashing against the agents. She turned her glare toward Maria Santos and the group of Hispanic families standing near the bounce house. "You filthy immigrants. You ruined my community. I tried to civilize this place. I tried to make it elite." The racial slurs that followed were ugly, hateful, and loud. They echoed across the silent festival grounds, captured by every smartphone and news camera. Whatever sympathy might have lingered in the hearts of the residents evaporated instantly. They saw her now, not as a community leader, but as a bigot who viewed them as props in her ego trip. "Get her out of here," Marcus ordered, disgust plain on his face. As the van door slammed shut on Vicky's screaming face, a heavy silence fell over Heritage Meadows. The villain was gone. The monster was caged. But the victims, the families, were still standing there, looking at their homes with terror in their eyes. Maria Santos stepped forward, holding her daughter's hand. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "Mr. Thornfield," she whispered, her voice trembling. Does this mean we're homeless? If you own the houses, do we have to leave?" This was the moment. The power fantasy usually ends with a hero laughing as he bulldozes everything. But I looked at Maria. I looked at the scared kids. I looked at the for sale signs that were now worthless. I remembered Martha. Zeke fights for what's right. I turned to the crowd. I still held the microphone. I still held the power to destroy them all. "The Ashworths lied to you," I said, my voice softening. "They sold you stolen property. They built your homes on toxic waste. They stole your money." I took a deep breath. "But I am not a thief," I continued. "I am a neighbor. And in Tennessee, neighbors don't throw neighbors out on the street." I pointed to the clubhouse. "That building is mine now. Tomorrow, we're turning it into a legal clinic. Marcus here is going to help every single one of you file claims against the Ashworth frozen assets to get your down payments back." I looked at Maria. "And for those who want to stay, once the EPA clears the land, I'm offering you a rent-to-own contract. No banks. No interest. No HOA fees. You pay me fair value, and at the end, I'll sign the deed over to you properly. Nobody is losing their home today except the woman in that police van." For a second, nobody moved. Then Maria dropped to her knees and began to sob. A cheer didn't go up. It was a cheering moment. It was a collective exhale of relief. The sound of 100 people realizing they had been saved from the brink of ruin. Ruby walked up to me, putting a hand on my shoulder. She wasn't recording anymore. "You realize you just gave away millions of dollars in leverage, right?" she asked quietly. "I didn't give it away, Ruby," I said, watching the EPA team begin to clean up the wetlands. "I invested it. The Ashworths wanted to build a kingdom. I'm building community." I looked at the house Vicky had built for herself, the biggest one on the hill, overlooking the whole subdivision. Although, I added, a small grin tugging at the corner of my mouth, "I am keeping that one. I think it'll make a hell of a barn for the new calves." The war was over. The cleanup was just beginning. The party was over, but the hangover was just beginning. And let me tell you, nothing causes a headache quite like a federal government declaring your entire neighborhood a toxic waste site on live television. The sun went down on festival day, but nobody in Heritage Meadows slept. The flashing lights of the police cruisers were replaced by the harsh, white work lights of the EPA hazmat teams. The sweet smell of funnel cakes had vanished, replaced by the smell of fear and the metallic tang of reality. Vicky Ashworth was sitting in a federal holding cell, but she had left behind a mess that would take a decade to clean up. I stood on my porch, drinking coffee that finally tasted good again, watching my newly acquired property transform from a suburban dream into a federal crime scene. The immediate aftermath of the arrest was a blur of bureaucratic violence. Once the shock wore off, the panic set in. Heritage Meadows wasn't just a fraudulent development. It was a ticking time bomb. Dr. Sarah Lightfoot didn't waste time. She set up a command post in the very clubhouse Vicky had built with stolen money. The marble floors were covered in plastic sheeting, and the HOA boardroom became the EPA Decontamination Center. The soil samples are conclusive, Zeke. Dr. Lightfoot told me, wiping grime from her forehead at 2 a.m. The chemical plume from the buried drums has migrated into the residential water supply. The levels of benzene and lead are off the charts. We can't let anyone stay here. That was the hardest part. The victory against Vicky was sweet, but telling Maria Santos that she couldn't sleep in her own bed that night was bitter. All residents must evacuate immediately. Dr. Lightfoot announced over the subdivision's PA system, the same one Vicky used to scold people about lawn height. This is a mandatory federal evacuation order. The water supply is contaminated, and the soil poses severe respiratory risk. Chaos erupted. People were throwing clothes into suitcases, crying, trying to load pets into cars. It looked like a disaster movie. But this is where the difference between a landlord and a neighbor comes in. I walked down to the command center. Where are they going to go, Sarah? FEMA is setting up cots in the high school gym, she sighed. It's the best we can do on short notice. No, I said, shaking my head. These people have been victimized enough. They aren't sleeping on gym floors. I pulled out my phone and called the owner of the Millbrook Inn, a buddy of mine from the Rotary Club. Jim, it's Zeke. I need every room you have. Yes, all of them. Put it on my tab. I'll send you the invoice, and we'll bill against the Ashworth seized assets later. It cost a fortune, but seeing the relief on Maria's face when I handed her a room, he was worth every penny. Go get some sleep, I told her. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. By sunrise, Heritage Meadows was a ghost town. Yellow EPA caution, tape fluttered in the breeze, wrapping around the manicured hedges and the expensive brick mailboxes. The silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of generators and the clicking of cameras. And oh, were there cameras. Ruby Morgan's live stream had gone viral. I'm talking international viral. The hashtag Heritage Scam was trending #1 on Twitter, or X, whatever they call it now, right above the Super Bowl. People loved the story. It had everything. A villainous Karen, a corrupt politician, environmental crimes, and an old cowboy with a secret weapon. News trucks from CNN, Fox, and the BBC were parked along the county road. They were calling me the sheriff of suburbia and the land baron of justice. But the local corruption network wasn't going down without one last desperate kick. Around noon, Sheriff Mike Ashworth, Vicky's nephew and the man who had threatened to arrest me for walking on my own grass, rolled up to the roadblock. He had 3 deputies with him, and he looked like a man who knew his career was ending and wanted to take someone down with him. He stormed past the EPA barricade, his hand resting on his gun. Where is he? Mike shouted, scanning the area for me. I want Ezekiel Thornfield in cuffs. He incited a riot. He trespassed on a crime scene. I was standing near the wetlands with Danny Kowalski, watching the excavation. I saw Mike coming. I didn't move. You're making a mistake, Mike. I called out calmly. You shut your mouth, old man. Mike yelled, pulling a pair of cuffs from his belt. You think because the feds are here you're safe? This is my county. You're under arrest for what? A voice boomed from behind him. Mike spun around. Marcus Webb, the U.S. attorney, was standing there, flanked by 4 FBI agents in tactical gear. Sheriff Ashworth, Marcus said, his voice cold as ice. We were coming to your office later, but since you're here to save us the gas. This is a local matter. Mike sputtered, backing up. It ceased to be a local matter when you accepted $50,000 in bribes to ignore the wetland dumping, Marcus said, holding up a warrant. We have your bank records, Mike. We have the wire transfers from the shell company. And we have the dash cam footage of you planting evidence. Mike froze. The deputies behind him slowly took their hands off their weapons and took a step back, distancing themselves from their boss. Michael Ashworth, an FBI agent, said, stepping forward, you are under arrest for racketeering, obstruction of justice, and acceptance of bribes by a public official. Watching the sheriff get handcuffed in front of the very people he had terrorized was the final nail in the coffin of the Ashworth regime. They took his badge, his gun, and his dignity right there on the pavement. The dominoes fell fast after that. Ruby broke the story the next morning. Bank president indicted for mortgage fraud. It turned out the local bank manager was Brad's brother-in-law. He had approved construction loans without verifying the title deeds, knowing full well the land wasn't theirs. The bank was shut down by regulators by lunchtime. Then came the city council. 3 members who had pushed for the annexation were found to have received anonymous donations totaling $10,000 each the day before the vote. They resigned in disgrace before the feds could even get to them. But the most satisfying revelation came from the airport. Ruby found me in the makeshift office we'd set up in the clubhouse. She looked exhausted but triumphant. "You won't believe what was in Vicky's luggage," she said, dropping a file on the desk. "Dirty laundry?" I guessed. "Try $2.3 million in bearer bonds," Ruby grinned, "and a fake passport." She wasn't going to a vineyard in Italy, Zeke. She was running. She knew the house of cards was collapsing. She was going to leave Brad, leave the neighbors, and disappear to the Cayman Islands. We released that information to the press immediately. Any lingering sympathy for the poor woman who lost everything evaporated. She wasn't a victim of an overzealous prosecutor. She was a rat jumping off a sinking ship with a cheese in her mouth. For the next week, my life became a blur of legal meetings and logistics. I was now the owner of 98 houses, a clubhouse, and a toxic waste dump. I sat down with Marcus and Patty Goldman, the forensic accountant. "The good news," Patty said, tapping her calculator, "is that the Ashworth C's assets are substantial. Between the bonds, the offshore account we froze, and the insurance payouts of fraud claims, we have about $30 million. And the bad news?" I asked. "The cleanup will cost $25, Dr. Lightfoot chimed in. "It's going to take 2 years to fully remediate the soil and groundwater. The houses can't be occupied until then." I looked out the window at the empty street. The swing sets were still. The flags were limp. It was a tragedy of waste. But, Danny Kowalski said, pointing to a map, "the structures themselves are mostly sound. Except for 3 on the swamp, we have to demo those. The rest? Once the dirt is clean, they're good homes." I made a decision then. "We keep them," I said. "We use the C's money to pay for the cleanup. We employ local crews, Danny, you're the foreman, to fix the code violations. And when it's safe, the families get first right of refusal on the rent-to-own contracts." "Zeke," Marcus warned, "that's a massive liability. You could just sell the land to a developer and walk away with millions." I touched the compass around my neck. "A developer got us into this mess, Marcus. A surveyor is going to get us out." The fallout wasn't just about destruction. It was about resetting the foundation. We had stripped away the rot, the corrupt politicians, the greedy HOA, the toxic soil, and now we were down to bedrock. As the sun set over the empty, silent subdivision, I saw a lone figure walking up the road. It was Maria Santos. She had come back to get a teddy bear her daughter had left behind. She stopped when she saw me. "They say you're the mayor of Ghost Town now," she said, a sad smile on her face. "Just the caretaker, Maria." I replied, "Just the caretaker." The war was won, but the peace? That was going to take a lot of work. And I was just a stubborn old man to do it. They say time heals all wounds, but in Millbrook County, it was a combination of time, $20 million in seized assets, and a fleet of bulldozers that did the trick. 6 months after the arrest, the yellow police tape is gone. The EPA tents are packed up. Heritage Meadows doesn't look like a crime scene anymore, nor does it look like the plastic paradise Vicky Ashworth tried to force into existence. It looks like something new, something honest. As I sit on my porch drinking coffee that tastes like victory, watching the morning mist rise over the restored wetlands, I realize that we didn't just win a lawsuit. We redefined what it means to be a neighbor. If you drive down County Road 9 now, you won't see the Heritage Meadows Estate sign anymore. I tore that down personally with my tractor the day the EPA gave the all-clear. It was a therapeutic afternoon. Instead, you'll see a simple wooden sign carved by Danny Kowalski himself. The Thornfield Community Trust. The landscape has changed. Those 3 houses built on the swamp? Gone. We demolished them. Watching those excavators crunch through the cheap timber and siding was a stark reminder of the greed that built them. But where they stood, the land is breathing again. Dr. Lightfoot's team did miracles. They removed tons of contaminated soil, replanted native cattails and river birch, and redirected the storm drains. Just yesterday, I saw a great blue heron hunting in the shallows of Willow Creek. Dr. Lightfoot told me the Tennessee cave salamanders are breeding again. Nature is resilient. It just needed us to stop poisoning it. The legal aftermath delivered justice with a federal efficiency that would have made Martha smile from heaven. Vicky Ashworth is currently residing in a federal correctional institution in Florida. She got 15 years. Apparently, orange jumpsuits don't come with HOA badges, and the warden doesn't care about her opinions on lawn maintenance. Brad received 20 years for racketeering and money laundering. It turns out the Russian mob doesn't offer legal aid to failed partners. Sheriff Mike Ashworth and the 3 corrupt city council members earned 5-year vacations, courtesy of the federal penitentiary system. The new sheriff is a young woman named Sarah Jenkins, the former deputy who tipped off the FBI about Mike's bribe money. She runs a clean department. But the real victory isn't in who we locked up, it's in who we kept free. 23 of the original Heritage Meadows families accepted my rent-to-own offers. They moved back in last month. The houses are safe now. Foundations reinforced, wiring fixed and legally zoned. Maria Santos, the teacher who confronted Vicky on stage, is now our community liaison. She organizes the neighborhood council. There are no fines for painting your mailbox the wrong color. There are no restrictions on parking work trucks in driveways. It's a real neighborhood, messy and loud and alive. We used the money, the 30 million seeds from the Ashworths, to launch the Thornfield Foundation. 10 million went to the environmental restoration. Another 5 million went to legal defense funds for other property owners fighting predatory developers. We're funding lawsuits in 3 other states right now. We're teaching HOAs that if they want to play games, we have the playbook. The clubhouse? It's not a legal clinic anymore. It's the Martha Thornfield Community Center. We host 4-H meetings, local voting drives, and yes, a free legal aid desk every Tuesday night run by Marcus Webb, who decided to delay his retirement because suing bad guys is too much fun. Ruby Morgan didn't just get a story. She got a career. Her series on the Heritage Meadows fraud won the Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting. She's working for the Washington Post now, but she comes back every month for Sunday dinner. She's currently writing a book about the case titled The Surveyor's Line. She says I'm the hero, but I keep telling her I'm just a stubborn old man who read the fine print. Danny Kowalski testified before Congress last week about construction corruption. They're drafting a new bill, the Kowalski Act, that strengthens whistleblower protections for construction workers who report safety violations. He runs his own company now, on his foundations, and he's booked solid for 2 years. Turns out, people like hiring a guy who chose conscience over a paycheck. And me? I'm still here. I'm still Zeke. I teach a surveying class at the community college twice a week. I tell my students, accurate measurements and honest documentation built America. Everything else is just expensive decoration. The other day, I was walking property line, just out of habit, when I ran into Maria's kids playing near the creek. They weren't scared of me anymore. They waved. Mr. Zeke, the youngest one, yelled. We found a turtle. I walked over. It was a box turtle, trundling through the mud. That's a good sign, I told them. Means the land is happy. I walked up the hill to the family plot as the sun began to set. The sky was that deep, bruising purple that Martha loved. I knelt by her headstone. It looked clean and bright, surrounded by the wild honeysuckle that had finally grown back over the scars of the construction equipment. We did it, Martha. I whispered. The land is safe. The neighbors are safe. And the bad guys are gone. I felt a peace I hadn't felt in 5 years. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was restful. Here's what this whole mess taught me. Standing up for what's right often means standing alone initially. It means people will call you crazy. They'll call you a nuisance. They'll try to buy you out, scare you out, or force you out. But my grandfather understood something that Brad and Vicky never did. Land isn't just an asset on a balance sheet. It's a responsibility. It's a living thing that connects the past to the future. When someone tries to steal your land, they aren't just taking dirt. They are stealing your history. They are stealing your children's inheritance. We won because we had the truth, yes, but we won because we documented everything. We won because we refused to be intimidated by titles, badges, or bank accounts. So listen to me. If you're dealing with an HOA nightmare, a corrupt council, or a neighbor who thinks they own the world, don't back down. Check your deeds. Verify your property lines. Find the old contracts in the basement. Because the only thing bullies are afraid of is a victim who knows their rights. Have you battled an HOA or a property dispute? Did you find a Clause 7 of your own? Drop your story in the comments below. Your experience might provide the courage another family needs to fight back against professional thieves hiding behind community development. Together, we can expose the fraud before it destroys more families. Subscribe to HOA Story for more tales of ordinary people defeating extraordinary corruption. We're building a community here, one story at a time. And remember, Never trust a developer who wears loafers on a job site. Thanks for watching. And Vicky, if you're watching from the rec room, get off my lawn.